eRide Pro came out with the SR and the 3.0 in 2025, but they also went ahead and went back to their 2.0, which is the bike that really got it started for them all and made some major updates. Now, I have yet to see what these updates are, so let's go ahead and get this bike unboxed. We'll show you how to build it, and then we'll see what all they have done to improve the 2025 eRide Pro SS 2.0. All right, before I get any further unboxing this bike, I always install the handlebars and all of the cables and brakes and everything along those lines. That way when I pull it off the box, nothing is dangling. So let's go ahead and get that installed. To do that, it's a 5mm Allen to loosen these bolts here, and then you'll have a 4mm for the front brake as well as the throttle. And then you've got a 3mm Allen for the light button. So go ahead and get all of that stuff loosened up. Once all that's loosened up, we'll go ahead and put on the front brake first. The light button. And then the throttle. And then we can set that in place. Now I'm just gonna put all of this roughly in place. I'm mainly just trying to get it out of the way for now before I pull the bike fully off the box so I can continue building it. After I get this all done, then I will go ahead and show you guys a full walkthrough on how to set up one of these bikes and get it ready to go out riding. Now that the handlebars are on the bike and roughly in place, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen off this front end. That way I can take it out of the box and move the whole bike over to a stand to get working on. So we'll undo these straps. This first strap's gonna be pretty easy to do. The second strap's gonna hold a lot of tension now, so be ready for it to pop. Now we wanna get the axle out of this axle block here. So to do that, I'm gonna take a 19mm. I'm gonna loosen off this bolt. It was already really loose from the packaging, so that's easy to pull on out. And then underneath, there are pinch bolts. On both sides, there's 2 pinch bolts each, so 4 pinch bolts total. I'll take a 5mm Allen, loosen those all the way off. A little bit tricky to get to here, but they're already quite loose. You just want to make sure there's no tension on this axle at all so that I can slide the axle out. This part's usually easier with 2 people, but you want to get the axle to come sliding out. So make sure you've got your axle nuts off the side and then take some tension off the fork. Slide that out. Once that's out, the bike is ready to move over to a stand. Now the bike's on a stand, ready to start getting the rest of the parts installed. We can go into the accessory box and look at everything it came with. So we've got a right and a left side foot peg here. We've got the front fender for the bike. We've got the fender mounting hardware. We've got spare nuts for the foot pegs. They provided a bunch of zip ties. We've got the display. We've got the shock cover. We've got the front number plate. eRide also provided a bunch of tools that come in this. It's mainly an assortment of Allen keys and wrenches. Got the front wheel spacers. And they also provided an owner's manual with the bike. All right, let's go ahead and get the front wheel installed onto this bike. The spacers that came in the accessories box, I went ahead and put into the front wheel. So you just go ahead and put those in. Now before I install this wheel, I'm gonna put a thin layer of grease on this axle. Doesn't have to be a lot, just has to be enough to coat it. The grease that I use is the Maxima waterproof grease. This has been by far the best grease that I've used in all my years of motorsports. Go ahead and slide this wheel into the brake caliper. Slide the axle through. Then you've got 2 axle lock nuts. We'll put one on each side of the bike. Then you'll take 2 19mm wrenches, one on each side, tighten them together. Now there's 2 pinch bolts on each side that need to be tightened. I do wish eRide Pro would provide the torque spec for all the pinch bolts and the bolts on the bike in their manual. However, they do not have that. So I'm gonna go ahead and go with 7 Newton meters here on the pinch bolts, which is pretty typical for these forks. So you'll tighten both of them down, and then you'll go back and forth until they're evenly tensioned. And then repeat that on the other side. Now the front wheels on the bike, we can go ahead and install the front fender. There were 3 bolts that came in the accessory package. I went ahead and put Loctite on these. Very important that you do that because there's a lot of vibration that will go through the front end. You don't want to lose these bolts. Go ahead and put those on. They're 4mm Allens. Now we're ready to put the display on the bike. It's 3mm Allens. We're gonna go ahead and take these bolts fully out. Then you just stretch this plastic over the handlebars. And then you can tighten down those 3mm Allens again. Now I'm not done putting my bars into position, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave this a little bit loose for now. That way I can move it around and adjust my handlebars where I need. Now that that's on the bike though, I can go ahead and plug it in. There are 2 arrows. You wanna make sure that those arrows are pointing directly at each other. Once you got that, then you can just go ahead and push the display into place, and it's installed. Next step would be to go ahead and put on the front number plate. Before I do that, I've got a lot of wires that I want to get cleaned up and organized into their forever home. So I'm going to route a bunch of these wires together here behind, and then eRide provided a bunch of zip ties, so you can go ahead and clean these up. Now it's important to route these in a way that when you turn, they don't have tension on them, but they are cleaned up and out of the way. And it's very important that this front brake hose going down stays completely out of the way of anything. So everything else can go behind this light, but this needs to stay out and in front. And then you'll want to make sure that you can turn the handlebars and then nothing gets pinched or too tight. And now you're in a good spot. I'm gonna go ahead and clip these and then put the front number plate on. To install the front number plate, you just take 4 of your zip ties, go ahead and put it right over all of those wires. Make sure that the front brake line stays completely out in the open. Put your zip ties through. Then I'm gonna clip off the excess zip tie. And also rotate it to where it's behind the number plate. Now you've got all your wires cleaned up and the front number plate installed. On this bike here is an accessory cable guide. I don't personally like using these. I find that they tend to kink the wire because it's just not large enough for it to free flow through. So using a 3mm Allen, I'm gonna go ahead and just take this completely off of the bike, like so. If you want to use this, you can. If you do decide to use it, make sure that this is perfectly in line to where when the fork goes through its travel and this cable moves, it does not get pinched inside of this. But once again, I would just remove it and leave it off. Now the front end's buttoned up, we can move on to the rear. This is a 6mm Allen on one side and a 13mm socket on the other. I'm also going to grease this piece here. So I'll just go ahead and take a thin layer of grease. Put it on there, loosen off this bolt. Now I just dropped a little spacer. You want to make sure You've got a spacer and a sleeve that goes through, and then there's another spacer on the other side. Make sure that's all in place, and then you can go ahead and put the bolt through the shock itself. It's a little bit tricky, but just get this lined up. Push that through. Go ahead and take your 13mm nut, and I'm gonna go ahead and just tighten that down, just like so. Very important that you make sure that your rebound knob is facing up. Now we can go ahead and install the shock cover. eRide Pro calls this a rear shock hugger. To install this, you just take a 4mm Allen, loosen off these 4 bolts that are already inside of the bike. Then you stretch this cover over the top of the bolt mounts. It's a little bit tricky to get stretched into place, so you can go ahead and lightly set one side of the bolt and stretch it on the other side. Put the bolt in the other side. Now that the front end and the rear end are done, we'll go ahead and put on the foot pegs. To do this, you just go ahead and slide it into the middle slot and line it up with the pins. You want to make sure that your foot pegs fling backwards. That way if you hit a rock or something, it just deflects coming up and it doesn't break your foot peg mount or your foot peg. Go ahead and slide that through. Take the 17mm nut, put it on the other side. And then using a 17mm socket, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that down. And then repeat on the other side. Now we can go ahead and open up the battery tray. To do that, the keys came in the ignition. I'm gonna take that key, I'm gonna put a little bit of pressure here on the battery lid and twist the key. You can go ahead and just lift that straight up. Now this battery is already plugged into the bike, but the communications port is not. So I'm gonna go ahead and take and plug that communication port in. So now I've got both the power and the communication cable plugged into the bike. Then I can go ahead and flick the breaker that's sitting inside of here on, and the bike is ready to fire up. Now the eRide Pro SS 2.0 comes with a limiter switch. It is this plug here with this black loop. If you want to unlock the full potential of this bike, just go ahead and simply unplug this. To do so, you just push down on the clip here and pull that out. Now this bike is unlocked to its full potential. This new eRide Pro SS 2.0 comes in at a weight of 155 pounds. All right, guys, we got this bike built. However, it is not yet set up to ride. I'm going to take you guys through how to get that set up. But before we do that, let's go over the differences that this new 2025 model has in comparison to the 2024. Now to start things off, there is the obvious one. This bike has got the same tires on it that the eRide Pro SR has, which also means that it has got an 18-inch rear and a 19-inch front. Now, if you're familiar with the eRide Pro SR, at the moment there is no aftermarket wheels available for that bike because they completely changed the hub spacing in order to accommodate for the new DOT4 style brakes that they have on that bike. This bike, on the other hand, has got the same mineral oil mountain bike brakes that it had on the previous generation of 2.0, which means that if you want to change the wheels, they are the same wheels that the aftermarket has for the eRide Pro SS 2.0. So you can go ahead and update these to a 1619 or an 1821, whatever you want to do, you can just go ahead and do that on this bike. But the 3.0 and the SR do have that new standard with the new brakes, so you cannot update those wheels at the moment. However, that is coming very, very soon. But don't worry, just because they went to an 1819 setup on this bike, it does not mean that you can't still get aftermarket wheels that will suit your needs. However, right out of the box, they did provide some really, really meaty tires, which is pretty awesome to see. But the biggest change that was made on this bike is definitely the suspension. E-Ride went with the Fastace ALX 13 RC front fork and a Fastace rear shock on this bike, and that is a huge difference. This is some of the best suspension that you'll see on bikes from the factory. That goes a really long way because the Fastace suspension is tunable. Now the rear shock is nothing special. None of these bikes come from the factory with a good rear shock. However, this ALX 13 RC front fork has got a lot of aftermarket upgrades available for it already. You can redo the damper tune, you can do different springs on it, different seals. You can even get a drop crown, which is really nice if you're doing an 1821 setup. So it's really nice that they went ahead and went away from the previous fork that they had on this bike, which was not a very good fork at all, to this new Fastace ALX 13 RC. Very excited to see that. E-Ride Pro also updated the battery connector for this bike. Now, some of the previous 2024 E-Ride Pro SS 2.0s also started coming with this battery connector later in the year. It's just a much more robust battery connector, so they went ahead and updated that, and now this bike is coming from the factory with that for 2025. This is the same 72 volt 40 amp hour battery, as well as the same power output as the bike previously had. So it is sitting at 12 kilowatts, but that makes it really nice because E-Ride Pro's got a range from a 6 kilowatt bike all the way up to a 25 kilowatt bike. So you just got to go for the power that you prefer. This E-Ride Pro SS 2.0 has got incredible power. 12 kilowatts is a really nice zone for this. I personally really love the E-Ride Pro 3.0 at 16 kilowatts, but it's really nice that they allow you to have this full range, and because they have a limiter, you can put beginners on this bike and not be worried about them, and then if you want to have a little bit more power, just unplug that limiter like I showed you earlier. That's a super nice feature that this bike has. Now there is one more update that was made to this bike. E-Ride Pro did go with a thicker and stronger swing arm axle bolt, so make sure that if you have an E-Ride Pro SS 2025 model or even a late 2024 model when they also did that update, be sure that you get the right axle for your bike if you end up bending one. It is very important that you check that, so make sure that whoever you go to shop for an axle, they've got listed which bike that axle is compatible for, and now you also have to make sure you've got the correct year. So very important when you're shopping for an axle to make sure that you get the right size. It's pretty nice to see that E-Ride Pro updated a couple things on this 2.0 for the 2025 season. Those are great improvements so far, but all of these improvements don't really mean anything if the bike is not set up properly. So I'm going to show you guys how to go through and set this machine up, give you a couple of tips and tricks that I've learned over the years that are going to make this a really enjoyable ride right off the bat. Now to start things off, you've probably seen me fighting with this front end while installing parts on it. It's very, very loose. Now they did a better job greasing the bearing in here, but even then I would still go ahead and take apart this front end and grease that bearing with more proper grease, like that Maxima waterproof grease that I typically use. But the biggest thing is getting the right tension on this headset. Now this is very much a rider preference thing. Me personally, I like it to be quite stiff. That way if I get tired while riding after a while, I can just squeeze with my legs and the front end's gonna stay pretty true and facing the right way. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this stiffened up to my preference, and I'll show you guys how to do that. Now to get this stiffened up, you've got to loosen up a bunch of bolts here, and then you can go ahead and tension this. So starting off with a 5mm Allen, I'm going to loosen the right side upper triple clamp. Get that pretty loose. Loosen the left side upper triple clamp. And then loosen the center of the triple clamp. And then I'm going to take a 6mm Allen and loosen the actual stem. And they've got that stiff. Take some real muscle to get that off. Now that I've got both of those loosened, I left this display loose earlier. I'm just going to push that out of the way a little bit and take off this top cap here. And this is where you're going to change the actual tension of this headset. So let's go ahead and put some pressure on that. Start cranking and turning that down a little bit. Now it's important to know that you can overdo this and break the stem lock that is holding this together, so you don't want to go too tight. I usually go just as tight as I can to where I'm not crushing the bearing, but it does stiffen up the front end quite a bit. That way, when I go to turn the handlebars, it actually kind of stays put. If you can see, I'll give it a little bump and then it'll kind of stay where that is. That's really nice for hitting braking bumps or going at high speed because the bike's going to stay in center line. So now that you've done that, let's go ahead and reline these handlebars back up. Make sure you've got that stem in the right place, and then tighten it back down with your 6mm Allen. Just tighten that on both sides. And then I'm going to re-tighten the upper triple. And to do that, I'm going to use 9 Newton meters on my torque wrench. And tighten all 3 of these bolts back up. Then I can put this black cap back over the top here. Put my display back in place. This is also a good time to go ahead and check all of the other pinch bolts on the triple clamp of this. Make sure they're all at 9 Newton meters. Now the next thing that's really important is handlebar alignment. Very important to make sure that the handlebars are centered here, but another very important thing is the actual angle the handlebars are at. Now if they're too rolled in, you're going to drop your elbows too much. If they're too far forward, you're going to have too much weight over the front of the bike, too far over the front axle, and that's going to make a really unstable front end. So the best thing to do is make sure that you get a perfect line coming with the pitch angle of the handlebar straight down your fork tube. That is the best place to position these. So I'll go ahead and make sure that they're in place there and that it's even side to side. And then I'll go ahead and tighten those handlebars into that position. It'll look something like this once you've got it. Both pluses will show evenly on both sides. This line will be in the center and you'll be at a good place for the handlebar alignment. Now that I'm happy with where the handlebars are, I'm going to go ahead and completely tighten down this display and put that in place permanently using a 3mm Allen. Now next thing that I always set up is the actual brake levers, and the way that I go about that is I take my hands and I make a triangle shape here, and then I take that triangle shape all the way out to the grips. Now that my hand is on the grips, you want to make sure that your finger is on the flex point of the lever, just right there in the center. I don't like the feeling of these levers very much personally, but find the comfortable spot for your finger on that lever and go ahead and put it there. But the most important thing is making sure your hand is actually at an angle. That way it squares up your elbows automatically and puts you in a good position to be in a good stance while riding. The next important thing to check for once you've got the levers in the right position side to side on the handlebar is what pitch angle you want them to be at. Now this is very rider dependent, so when you're standing up and you're in an attack position, you want to just make sure that your arm is as straight as possible. That's a good zone to be, but you have to make sure that you're in the correct attack position to do so. If you're way too far over the front of the bike, the lever's going to go down way too far. You don't want it all the way down there. Typically, sitting down, straightening up your back, and then putting that lever into a good place is right where you want to be. That's where I'll go ahead and tighten it down. That way it's in a pretty neutral position for when I'm both sitting and I'm standing. That way I can access it pretty easily anytime that I come back over onto the brake. Now the next thing that I typically set up on a bike is the suspension. It's important to keep in mind that this bike, because it has the same wheels as the E-Ride Pro SR, being an 18 in the rear and a 19 in the front with that really large meaty tire in the rear, it might actually pitch this bike forward a little bit too far. Luckily, there's a pretty quick solution for that I've already covered in a previous video titled Free Upgrade for E-Ride Pro 3.0 and SR. Now basically all that you do in that video is take this spacer that's under the triple clamp here, move it on top of the headset. That way you can actually raise the front end of the bike a little bit. Makes it nicer for the pitch angle of this bike with that big 18-inch rear. Now the most important thing about a bike's suspension setup is the balance of the bike front to rear. If you don't have a good balance there, you're not going to be able to set the suspension up and the clickers very well. So important to do that if you feel like this bike is pitched too far forward. Typically you can tell that that's the case if the front end is kind of tucking anytime that you go to turn. Now, if it's doing the opposite and it's pushing or understeering, then the rear end might be a little bit too low. So at that point, you could adjust the rear end with the preload. That's just kind of a rule of thumb to get the bikes balanced well. But once the bike is balanced well, we can go ahead and move into the suspension. Like I said before, the rear shock on this bike is nothing special. In fact, the dampening characteristics of it are pretty problematic at times. So with that being the case, I would pretty much just center everything out. Center the compression clickers out, center the rebound clickers out, and adjust the preload with the spring to get the right pitch angle of the bike. If the shock is lacking from that point for your riding style, you probably just need to go ahead and upgrade the rear shock. That's the case on every single one of these bikes. Even though the Fastace is on the better end of stock suspension, it's still nothing special like an EXT Arrma would be on these bikes. So for the rear end, pretty much just center everything out and try to find the balance. Now the front end, like I mentioned before, this is a much better fork. And on the top here, you have got the rebound knob. So I'm gonna turn it all the way inward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So this fork was set all the way out to about 20 clicks. This fork has a total of 21 clicks. So it was extremely fast on the rebound end of things. I'm gonna go ahead and put this at about 10 clicks out. So remember, if you go in or clockwise, that is slowing down the rebound of the fork. So how the fork returns, it will return slower. And then if you go counterclockwise, that is how fast it will return. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this to about 10 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'm gonna try it right there in that position. Rebound is extremely crucial because this will define the traction of your front end. So make sure that it's at a good place to where the tire is returning to the ground and providing optimal traction over bumps. On the other side of the fork here is just an air bleed. So I'm gonna go ahead and loosen this off and release all of the air that was previously in the fork from it sitting in the box. So you can just loosen that off, it bleeds the air. Go ahead and put that back on. It's important to check this quite regularly because you can get air that builds up into the fork, and then the fork won't feel as subtle on the top end of the bumps. And on the rebound side, there's also an air bleed. It is right here with this flathead screwdriver. So I'm gonna go ahead and loosen that off, bleed all the air out of that. You'll kind of hear it come out if there's some buildup, and then just tighten that all the way back down. And on the lower part of the fork, on the same side as the rebound adjustment, is a compression adjuster. So it's important to keep in mind that this suspension is separate fork function, which means your damper is all on the right side, rider's right side fork leg, and your spring is on the other side of the fork leg. So I'm gonna adjust the compression here. Let's go ahead and count how many clicks it's at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 clicks out is where the fork was set to. Now this fork only has 11 clicks of compression adjustment, so like the rebound side, it was set all the way out, which means it's in its softest setting. Now if you're a little bit on the heavier side, I would definitely stay on the more closed end of things. However, I would never fully close off your compression adjustment. If you're having to fully close things off, then chances are you need this fork revalved and should probably go up to a heavier spring rate. So I'm gonna go ahead and back this off about 5 clicks. 5 clicks out of 11. And we'll try it there. If I need to go stiffer, I've got a little bit of adjustment, and if I need to go softer, I've also got a little bit of adjustment. On the rear end, there's 8 clicks of rebound adjustment, so I just went ahead and put it right in the center at 4. And then on the top of the shock, there are 18 clicks of compression on a blue knob that is very difficult to see under here. So I just went ahead and put that at 9. Like I said before, just kind of center out the rear shock, see how it feels, and if it is squatting too much in the rear end, then you just adjust that by putting more preload on the shock by tensioning the spring with the collar up here at the top. Now that the bike is properly set up, it's going to be a lot nicer to ride. So I'm going to go ahead and take you through the display and the functions of this bike, and then you can go ahead and get out on the trail. All right, we can go ahead and turn on the key. Now there are two positions. This center position here that I just clicked it to will activate two USB ports. You've got a USB-C and a traditional USB underneath this cover here. And then if you flick it fully on, the actual bike will turn on and the display will come on itself. With the display on, you have got your battery percentage in the bottom right. It's currently sitting at 33%. In the center, you've got the speedometer. On the top left, you've got a trip, and on the top right, you've got an odometer, so how many miles this bike has on it total. And in the bottom left, you've got a clock. Now to adjust things on the display, I've got 3 buttons on the side here. I'm gonna go ahead and hold down the bottom button. It's gonna bring me into a menu. Here I've got a My Vehicle menu, the brightness of the screen, what time the bike is at. Just set that time. I click the bottom button and I'll go into it. It is currently 10:54. So I'll click that to 10, click that down to 10:54. Now that is set. And then I can go down to the unit. I want it to be an imperial, which it currently is. I could go metric if I would like to. Click back into the display here. I can change English, Spanish, and Chinese. I can change the wheel size. It's interesting this wheel size only has 19-inch and 17-inch when this bike is currently on an 18-inch. So hopefully eRide Pro will go ahead and make an update for that. Then you've got a gear ratio. So depending on what rear sprocket you've got on this bike, you can have a gear ratio updated there. And then in the bottom, it'll show you what firmware is currently on the bike. Now I've got 2 adjustments on this bike. It is currently sitting in sport mode. If I flip the switch on the handlebars, I can switch it over to eco mode. On the right side of the handlebars next to the throttle is the light switch. You just go ahead and click that and turn on and off your light. Well, there it is, guys. That is the 2025 eRide Pro SS 2.0. Let me know what you guys think about these changes. I'm really glad that they went with different suspension. I think that is going to go a really long way with this bike. And I'm really glad the old standard of wheels fits these, so I can go ahead and upgrade the wheels to whatever I want them to be. And all of the other eRide Pro aftermarket parts also fit, so I can do foot pegs, I can do handlebars, direct mount stem. Everything that needs to be done to this bike, you can do. But out of the box, they made some nice improvements that go a long way for just going out there and having a good time on the trail. So hopefully this video helped you guys out. If it did, please click that like and subscribe button. It goes a really long way. We'd love to keep making this content for you. And yeah, let me know what you think about the 2025 eRide Pro SS 2.0.